Trump, according to sources, had been telling regional leaders that he had given Israel 2 months to accomplish his objectives after Israel abandoned the January ceasefire deal, and now is the time to bring the war to an end. 2. U.S. gives the proposal to Israel. Israel publicly, according to Ynet and Jerusalem Post, the proposal was delivered to Israel late Sunday without prior coordination, and Israeli officials reacted with alarm. Before we get into this, before we get into the Macron slap, last thing I wanted to cover was what I said earlier this morning about like the potential for a ceasefire. Overnight, Hamas and U.S. officials reached a verbal understanding on the framework of a Gaza ceasefire. Sources involved in negotiations told Drop Site's Jeremy Scahill. Jeremy Scahill, as you know, has direct access to Hamas leadership and is one of the only outlets in the United States of America that actively covers the statements coming from the Hamas side in this negotiations process, doing the Lord's work, basically. Dropsite has been shown the full text of the document outlining the terms to which Hamas agreed. Some of these details have also been confirmed by sources interviewed by Al Jazeera and Al Mayadeen. Scahill reports that the understanding was communicated to Hamas through Palestinian-American intermediary Bashar Ababa in coordination with the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. Hamas accepted the terms in the document and was told the U.S. believed the framework could work, pending Israeli approval. But of course, Israel did not offer that approval. A senior source from Hamas told Dropsite Jeremy Scahill, "We have accepted the Witkoff proposal, which is a 60-day temporary ceasefire for releasing the 10 living Israeli prisoners, 5 at the beginning and 5 at the end. President Trump will personally announce the agreement." But before the deal could advance, Israeli officials rushed to the media to split. Soon after, Witkoff publicly accused Hamas of misrepresenting the proposal, directly contradicting what sources told Dropsite had been agreed to in private discussions. What they are doing here, what they did here, is exactly the same thing that the Biden administration would do, and it's exactly the same thing that the Blinken, it's the exact same thing that Blinken would do. It is identical, okay? It is identical. Biden would act as though they are listening to the Qatari envoys, and then Hamas would say yes to a deal. Israel would say no to said deal, and then they would turn around and make it seem as though Hamas was actually disrupting the ceasefire process, when in fact it was always Israel. So there is no daylight between the Trump administration and the Biden administration on the way that they've dealt with Israel so far. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people want to engage in the act of wishful thinking and assume that the Trump administration could be different, but this is the exact same fell for it again, I told you so nonsense. Okay? It is exactly the same shit. Now, what Hamas had believed it had secured is the 13-point document shown in the drop site, a 70-day ceasefire, a release of 10 living Israeli captives in 2 batches, half on the first day and the other half on the last day. Hamas would also release the bodies of the 16 deceased captives. Hamas said it needed a 2-week window to locate all burial sites. A personal public guarantee from Trump, committing to the ceasefire and the pullback of Israeli forces to their March 2nd positions, the resumption of unrestricted aid, including food, fuel, medicine, housing materials, and construction equipment, a cessation of all Israeli military operations, including the surveillance activities, a cessation of all armed activities by Palestinian resistance groups. Witkoff would personally, as a guarantor, sign a ceasefire deal in Doha and shake hands with the Hamas lead negotiator, Dr. Khalil al-Hayya. Witkoff would head the U.S. delegation, which would also include Adam Baylor and Baba, the American, who is has a back channel access to Hamas, which, by the way, is, I guess, not looked at so favorably by the Trump administration if it's someone like myself or Jeremy Scahill doing it. Upon signing the ceasefire, an independent technocratic committee of Palestinians would immediately take charge of Gaza's governance, and reconstruction efforts would commence. The U.S. and regional mediators would guarantee continued ceasefire negotiations and aid after 70 days until a permanent ceasefire is reached. The U.S. and as long as negotiations continue, the U.S. would remain committed to a ceasefire and facilitating aid entry until a permanent peace agreement is reached. Hamas initially proposed a 90-day ceasefire, then said it would accept a 70-day version to align with the U.S. position. Israel wanted a shorter window. Hamas subsequently told Scahill it had agreed to an initial 60-day truce. Sources told Drop Site that Qatar, particularly in the wake of Edon Alexander's release, applied pressure on Trump to secure this agreement. As Drop Site previously reported, Witkoff promised Hamas that aid would resume to Gaza 2 days after Alexander's release, and Trump would call for a ceasefire negotiation to end the war. Neither of those happened. Can you explain what they mean by a technocratic committee? It just means that Hamas dissolves as a political entity, and all of the civilian governance is given to the responsibility of a separate party, an independent party comprised of Palestinians, because Hamas understands the way it is perceived in the Western world. They do not want a complete collapse of civil affairs, obviously. They want the continuation and the efforts. They want to defend the Palestinians. They want to make sure that there is Palestinian sovereignty. And they basically are saying, we're willing to have an independent technocratic committee take over the responsibility, as opposed to like offering it to the Palestinian Authority, for example, because that's like something that has been entertained. But they want Palestine to be led by Palestinians. They also understand that there is no world where Hamas continues to govern Palestinians because of the way that people perceive Hamas. But because they're more interested in, once again, the continuation of Palestinian existence in the Gaza Strip, more so than their own like selfish ambitions of like dominating the Strip, as is consistently claimed by Israel dick riders, say Hamas are bad guys, they're bad guys, all they want is death and destruction, they hate it, they hate the Palestinians. This right here directly contradicts that. Trump, according to sources, had been telling regional leaders that he had given Israel 2 months to accomplish his objectives after Israel abandoned the January ceasefire deal, and now is the time to bring a war to an end. 2. U.S. gives the proposal to Israel. Israel publicly, according to Ynet and Jerusalem Post, the proposal was delivered to Israel late Sunday without prior coordination, and Israeli officials reacted with alarm. The eagerness with which it was in Israel indicated a deep fear that Washington would accept it and even try to impose it. One Israeli official told Ynet, accepting it is in effect surrender to Hamas. Another admitted, we don't know what the Americans will say. Well, it turns out Americans said exactly what they were saying under Biden as well, which is to immediately shift the blame over to Hamas, because who's going to defend Hamas? Who's going to defend the truth? Okay? Who is going to defend the truth? No one. Because the truth requires people to have the moral courage to openly admit that Hamas is a more responsible party that is more invested in the continuation of Palestinians in the region than Israel, which is exterminationist and belligerent. Okay? That is a 100% truth that is impossible for Americans to contend with. It's just never going to happen. And Israel knows that, which is why Israel will say this deal. And then Americans will turn around and go, yeah, Hamas, the bad guys, they fucked this deal up again. In spite of the fact that they were the ones who put the deal together with Hamas and actually brought it to Israel. But it doesn't matter. The draft formulated by Baba in direct talks with Hamas was immediately declared unacceptable by Jerusalem, and the rejection came before any U.S. comment from the public. So then the U.S. reversal comes in, where Steve Witkoff, and by the way, this is a betrayal that is important. Okay, Palestine gets what it deserves for supporting. Palestine doesn't support Israel, chatter. They support emancipation, and I do too. I think you don't understand. You are in enemy territory here if you consider the Palestinian population to be doing acts of, as opposed to the Israeli government doing unimaginable, untold acts of on a daily fucking basis. What is more than that's what Israel is doing? You can keep relying on your lack of knowledge surrounding this matter, but this is one of the few places online and one of the few places in America where we are having a real conversation, where we're looking directly at both sides and what the agreements look like and how the American government is lying in the process. It's okay, though. There will come a day where you inevitably lie to everyone around you and say, oh, dude, I was always pro-Palestine. Like, totally. It's really tough what Israel did, man. Really tough. But, of course, you will know the deep shame in your heart. It will eat away at you like a cancer, as it has already eaten away at your soul. You have dehumanized yourself by defending Israel to this degree, 19 months into a campaign. So let's continue. So Witkoff immediately comes out after the Israeli rejection. Witkoff publicly states via Axios' Barak Ravid, what I have seen from Hamas is disappointing and completely unacceptable. This contradicted what Hamas had been led to believe during the talks with U.S. mediators. According to Scahill, Hamas was told the proposal met U.S. requirements and that the next step was for Witkoff and others to work on securing Israeli approval. Witkoff's statement gave Israel diplomatic cover to walk away. This is exactly what Antony Blinken did. Exactly what Antony Blinken did. The only difference in this circumstance is that Hamas had never direct contact with Antony Blinken or American officials, but instead were engaging in the act of shuttle diplomacy by way of Qatari diplomats in Doha, and negotiators were talking to the Qatari side, and then the Qatari side was talking to the Israeli negotiators, as opposed to Hamas directly talking to the American government. This is very important, though, because when Steve Witkoff, who has already dropped the phase 2 of the ceasefire negotiations at the behest of Israel, does this with Idan Alexander only a couple of weeks ago, and then simultaneously is doing this now for a third time, eventually Palestinians who are still desperate, like Hamas, who is still desperate for any kind of negotiation and any kind of like more reasonable individual, more restrained individual than Israel, is going to recognize that there's not a deal that they can make with America either. You know, I think some people won't regret supporting what the state of Israel are doing. Some people are just so Islamophobic and racist that they won't feel horrible. I mean, it's okay. There's still people who like talk about Rhodesia in positive ways. They're just, we know what they are. They're disgusting white supremacists. Yeah, Nazis will always exist, you know? Israel claims no guarantee to end the war. Channel 12 reported that during the discussions, Hamas believed it had secured American guarantees for a permanent end of the war, but Israeli officials now insist there was no such commitment. According to the outlet, Israel insisted the Trump admin stands by them on this matter and that the American commitment is only the actual conduct of negotiations to end the war with no guarantees of results. This directly contradicts what Hamas understands. And that is precisely because America is directly lying to Hamas. And because the media is directly involved in massaging the narrative at the behest of Israel, no one is actually going to do the journalism or even report on the existing journalism that Dropside News is doing. They're never going to go to the Hamas side to hear what the Hamas side looks like. They're never going to try to develop a deeper understanding. At least back in the day, this kind of investigative reporting would be conducted every now and then. For every 25 articles defending the southern Vietnamese puppet state, there would be at least like one that would entertain the notion of like what the North Vietnamese Liberation Front was engaging in, like what their demands were. You know what I mean? There would be, obviously, Seymour Hersh is a great example. There would be investigations into the war crimes being conducted by American troops in Vietnam, for example, like the My Lai massacre. Nowadays, the one good, brave reporting for the 25 State Department cronies is gone. There isn't even that one person that engages in the act of actually reporting on the other side and their ambitions here, or the other side's opinions. And it's being conducted in it's being conducted in this like black and white, open fashion. Like this ethnic cleansing is not being hidden at all. And it's getting to a point where I think Americans will inevitably realize that there is no democratic process. And this is yet another example of such realities. There is no, you can demand as much as you want. You can be constantly in the fucking streets. You can do direct actions. Okay. You can shut down traffic. You can do whatever you want. The American government hears you, but they do not listen to you and they do not care. And they are going to continue defending Israel till the very last Palestinian is ethnically cleansed from the Gaza Strip. So at least that's what they're presenting right now. Things can still change. Obviously, things can change in Europe. That would apply more pressure. You should not stop protesting. You should still continue to apply pressure to the best of your ability. You should continue to still talk about the plight of the Palestinians, especially right now when we are at, this is the maximum amount of pressure, okay? This is the least popular Israel has ever been throughout its history, and it will only continue to be less popular, and that America will have to recalculate their strategic positioning or directly admit that they are a fucking dictatorship. Okay? And the same goes for Western liberal democracies in general. But I wanted to just go through that for you and help you understand that this is precisely what the Anthony Blinken coalition, the Biden administration did, where they would listen to the very reasonable demands being made by Hamas for hostage release in exchange for an end to the genocide, an end to the occupation. And then Israel would turn around and add like a poison pill provision last second to the ceasefire negotiations, or directly say, no ceasefire. We're going to continue pummeling the Gaza Strip. And then Anthony Blinken would turn around and say, Hamas is not a responsible party here. Hamas is not a restrained party here. They are the ones who are spoiling this deal. And the media would uncritically report it over and over and over again. You know that that's not the truth. You know that that's not the case because I was also covering the angle from the opposing side. I was also covering the angle of the Palestinian side. Not only was I talking about the humanity of the Palestinians, but I was also talking about how reasonable of a negotiating party Hamas was in this process, telling you what the truth is. This is something to remember, okay? This is something to remember. It's also, interestingly enough, it's also odd that a place that is as liberal as Reddit, that fucking supposedly despises the Trump administration and the unique ways in which they are negotiating with like Russia and Ukraine and hates that, will then turn around and take his word as bond, take his word as though it is the ultimate truth when it comes to Israel. I wonder why. What is this? Phil, you can't tweet stuff like this. You work for Biden and didn't do anything to push back against Biden's total deference to Israel. Not only virtually the entire world, but a majority of Israel support the deal to end the war and free hostages, yet Netanyahu government continues to pursue costly illusion of total victory. Reports of Trump frustration, but no sign of meaningful opposition to blockade, invasion, and occupation. There is nothing funnier. There is nothing funnier than a guy who worked at the State Department under Biden basically repeating the correct criticism against Biden now that it is literally fucking Trump doing it. Here, Biden disparages Netanyahu in private, but hasn't significantly changed U.S. policy towards Israel and Gaza. Interesting. How the fuck did that happen, you know? Yes, sometimes my camera turns on and off for like a blip, for a brief moment. Oh, God. Anyway, on that note, let's get to President Macron getting slapped in the face by his wife, his much older wife.